talk about the myths. Talk about what you're seeing and how do we bust those myths wide open? What do you do at Interact to try to do that?
Well, we spend a lot of time trying to educate and make the community aware of what those myths are and what the true facts are. So I think a lot of the myths have already been touched on already. I think that there are certain misconceptions about who the typical victim is. And the truth is that anyone can become a victim of domestic violence or sexual violence. People from all walks of life, all income levels, all races. There's no discrimination. I think something that the video touched on is a misconception about why doesn't she just leave or why doesn't he just leave? And it is difficult. There are many barriers that prevent someone from leaving their abuser. There's the financial considerations that have been discussed. There's child care, transportation, housing. There's a lot of things that stand in the way. And as the video mentioned, it's also the most dangerous time for a woman is when she leaves that abusive situation, because the abuser realizes that they're losing that power and control and they're threatened. In my case, my ex-husband threatened to take our children and leave the state. And thankfully he wasn't able to do that, but it's very scary. So I think that's something that we all need to understand. It's not as easy as just picking up and leaving. I think that sometimes also we forget that there's other people that are impacted by the situation, that it's not just between the adults and there's the victim, but everyone around that person is impacted, and the children especially. We oftentimes forget about the children that are witnessing that violent situation and how it affects them. So those are some of the top things that we try to make sure people remember and think about.
And talking about impact, George, you had a painful experience in your on one of your properties in Cameron Village, and I know that affected you. It affected your company. It affected your community in that area. Tell us a little bit about what happened and how you guys helped people deal with that.
Sure. So you're referring to Kathleen Bertrand. She was murdered at Cameron Village Shopping Center almost 2 years ago. She was a victim of domestic violence that had fled from her ex-husband, had made her way to North Carolina, had been doing the right things in terms of support for herself and her family. Her ex-husband was able to track her down and found her through her place of employment and greeted her one morning and murdered her on the sidewalk. So that was, it was 100 yards from my front door. It was on a shopping center that we've been involved with for so long. People think of it as a safe neighborhood gathering area. It was very traumatic for many reasons. So
It can happen anywhere.
It can happen anywhere, right? And then the murderer fled on foot, and so the whole neighborhood, the whole area, Interact is a couple blocks away. They were searching our offices. I mean, it tore up the community and put everybody on edge. I was thinking about that though. I was speaking to somebody earlier. There's a silver lining to it, is that most of these cases are so private. There are 4 people a day in the United States murdered in domestic violence situations. Very rarely do you have an opportunity to have such public awareness as one that happens on a sidewalk of a major shopping center. So, Kathleen's memory won't be forgotten. The situation won't be forgotten. The Cameron Village merchants and neighbors, they all rallied around the cause. They've supported Interact. They have supported each other. And, I'm hoping that a lot more good things come out of it than the tragedy of that day.
More awareness, for sure.
Absolutely.
Creighton, do you think that hearing George's story, I mean, is this one of the main reasons why the business community, not just financial, but just personally, should be invested in this issue? Because it can happen anywhere.
Absolutely. It can happen anywhere, and as we stated before, it can happen to anyone. And to not take the responsibility to acknowledge what is happening around you. The story I talked about a little bit earlier where I started was in one of my branches. But I've also seen that in many other areas. When I was able to now recognize and acknowledge what was going on, that made me say, from a business standpoint, we need to take a responsibility. And the first thing I did was reach out to North Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence to help me be able to understand and figure out what more we could do to be able to acknowledge this. So to really be able to see other businesses tie into that the same customers, the same members, the same consumers, the same employees are all going to these same places. To me, it's a responsibility thing. It's a community thing. And I think that awareness should bring everybody out to say, what are the other organizations that can help you acknowledge that? Help your employees that are going to that. Help your consumers that are going to that. To me, that's part of a sustainable community. And I think that's something that all businesses should want to strive to be a part of.
We've talked about, thank you, we've talked about the law enforcement response. We've talked a little bit about some of the response of some of these agencies that Holly and Jennifer work for. Representative Faircloth, let's talk about the law, because obviously that's a component in this. I mean, we have to have laws that protect victims and punish people who are offenders. And I meant to say this earlier, back when I started covering this issue in 1989, even news organizations were reluctant to call it murder when a man killed his wife. They called it a domestic. And it occasionally happens today. But we all know that if you kill somebody, it doesn't matter how you're related to them, it's murder. So how do we get our laws to understand this, our lawmakers, and how do we create laws that will protect victims?
I think it's interesting to see how the use of the law in addressing domestic situations has changed over the years. I can remember a classic way to approach a situation where a man and woman were living together and they were not married, and for some reason they got into a domestic confrontation and the police were called. The general police response was to go there and say, what's going on? Well, he hit me, and the story goes on there. And then, well, is this your husband? Well, no, we're not married, but they were obviously living together. The law at that time was you can't live together as man and wife unless you're married. So the easy solution was to arrest them both. The charge was fornication and adultery. How, you know,
Didn't solve the problem.
You can't even find that on the books now.
No.
But that was the simple way, without training, that officers addressed using that type of law. Now the laws primarily are there. I think the problem is having the system understand how to apply those laws to the domestic situation as opposed to the street situation or gang situation or whatever. And it's very easy now. I think that certainly the legislature understands, and I think others in the system understand, that if something needs to be changed to bring a law into confrontation with the problem, then we can do that. And the interest is there now.
I think one of the most important tools, John, that law enforcement use is a 50B, which is a protective order. But basically, a protective order is a piece of paper. So talk to me about what you guys are doing. I know we've talked about this in the past, to not just make that a piece of paper, but follow that case through and try to make sure that person is being protected.
Well, understand that the 50B order, the Domestic Violence Protective Order, is a civil order, and it's an order that has to be generated by the victim. So in some angles or views, when you look at it, you really are turning that and putting that back, the burden back on the shoulder of the victim, if you look at it in that way. The legislature has mandated that if law enforcement has probable cause to believe that that order has been violated, that we are mandated to arrest. It's one of the few where arrest is mandated on the books, but it is a tool. It's one of many that are available to us within the criminal justice system as far as practitioners, and certainly to victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. I will say at the sheriff's office, we have used the protective order as the vehicle to provide an increase in victim safety. And by that I mean in certain circumstances, it may be an issue surrounding removal of one from a residence, the offender, or it could be disarming a prohibited individual, for having him surrender his firearm. So there's a lot of different things that
But
can be
you
done.
guys in your county, you're aware of what protective orders you have, and you follow up on them. You follow those cases. You actually pay attention to, hey, this could potentially be a situation at some point.
We do, and our detectives attend the domestic violence court that they have every Friday on those, and they look out for things like the intimidation coming into the courtroom or while they're inside or outside in the parking lot. And really what we've done, I can't overstate this, is our agency has looked at those knowns. The behaviors of an offender are the same from person to person to person. Only the faces and names change. These barriers that we've referred to, those are exploited by the offender in almost every case. They are used as leverage to re-victimize the victim. They look at our laws, they find weaknesses within those, and they exploit them. They exploit them each and every day. And we, as law enforcement, have to be on our game and be aware that that type of behavior is occurring and hold the offenders accountable that are, in fact, violating same.
Holly, you do some court advocacy in your organization, and you're in a rural area. How does that impact what you guys do as opposed to being in a more urban area like Raleigh or like Charlotte?
I got to be careful how I say this. It seems, which Robeson County is actually the largest county in North Carolina, but it doesn't seem that way. It seems like it's a very small town. Everybody knows everybody. So you get to court and the defendant's uncle is the judge's brother, and it just seems like there's always a loophole for individuals to find. But I will say that it seems like things are getting better. We are doing more orders. It seems like the DV Task Force Unit is working with us. We've really been trying to step outside of the box and make sure that we are not only assisting with the protective order, but we attend court with them. We make sure that their needs are met, make sure there are other resources that they need, make sure we try to link them with those resources. But there are still, those loopholes simply because it is kind of like that small town feel. I know you, you know me, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. So we still have a lot of that going on.
You have a lot of political hurdles, it sounds like,
Yes, ma'am.
to deal with. Jennifer, what about in Wake County? How big is the problem, and what are the obstacles that you deal with in the court system?
Wow. Well, I mean, Wake County is certainly affected by domestic violence. It's not immune. I know that we have, I believe it's 4 courtrooms in Wake County that deal specifically with just domestic violence issues. And I personally have been to that courtroom a time or two, and it's usually very full and very busy, which is really, I think, a sad thing. And Interact does provide court advocacy as well. We have counselors there to assist victims through the process, which can be, the process of getting a domestic violence protective order can be very complicated. But we're working with folks to make it an easier time and to give them the support that they need.
George, what do you think the business community can do when it comes to this issue? Obviously, helping fund initiatives is a big part of that, but what else?
Well, I mean, I think you're onto something here with the awareness campaign. Businesses have the voice of, they have the pocketbooks to support organizations that can make a difference. They have the voice with lawmakers in many cases that can help promote positive change. The people and the businesses can be the front lines to help identify things within their business, and it's it's something that that I think is happening more and more. It's less of a in the shadows issue, and it's because of awareness campaigns. And I'm excited to see this one happening. But it's really, I feel like alcoholism and drug abuse years ago was this, and now people can talk about it, and we're making great strides towards it. And so maybe this is the next thing that people can grasp onto it. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something to be ignored. It's preventable, and it's something that we should, as a society, buck up and take care of.
And Creighton, what would you recommend to businesses as somebody in the banking industry in terms of, why this just makes good sense to be a partner in this issue?
The key thing to me is simply to make the connection. Connect the dots. We've all talked about several very amazing organizations here that are here to support. I think where we really need to make sure we are acknowledging that this is a very prevalent issue, and then make those connections when we see it, when we feel it, and then talk to these organizations. I think sometimes businesses won't talk about this. We will sometimes ignore it, and then it only gets more pervasive. If we really want to be that community steward, all of us businesses will talk that. If we really want to walk it out, how do we make that connection with all of these different organizations? That's the thing that I really challenge us on from a business standpoint, because now we see this problem. Now it's not just a problem, it's a face. And once you see that face and we get the people who can do something more about that, that's when I think these campaigns really take off.
Okay, great. Thank you.